Well, the NOLs were a unique situation also, that were available to all corporations that had resources. Um, I guess for an example, in our case, where we generated NOLs, is we had an oil and gas property that had an expectation of value that had already been drilled and had a structure in it that we were able to get experts to say that it should have had $600 million worth of value to us if the oil was there. Well, in essence, what that said is that the property we got from the government didn't have the oil, which our expectations were that it did. Therefore, we got to deduct what that value was against income, or we got to sell those NOLs to somebody who could use them. Now, we had to sell that property in order to trigger the NOL. So we sold that particular property, for instance, to an ARCO because it was an oil and gas property. And we were able to take the loss because there wasn't a structure there. If you were dealing with timber, at the time that you received the property, the timber value was, say, $10 a board foot. And by the time you went to log it and sell the timber, it was at $2, okay? You could take an NOL for that, a loss, because the value was gone. Now, it might come back at a later time, but it was gone then, and you could trigger that even though you had to sell that timber value. So again, these were unique IRS provisions that took some legislative manipulating to make sure they worked for corporations. And I think the estimate was that if we did this, there'd probably be $400 or $500 million worth of, transactions done. It ended up there was billions of dollars worth of transactions done, which was a good thing for the Alaska Native population. Is that, I look at it as getting a little bit back from the federal government as to the takings that they had done to us for eons and to American Indians. Again, it was just a little triumph for a period of time. We had to fight IRS, of course, every step of the way. But throughout most of it, I think most of the corporations did fairly well. Not all of them got to use all their NOLs because they cut it off. I think Arctic Slope didn't get to use up all their NOLs. Some of the others didn't. Syria was probably the only one that really did get to use all of its NOLs. In the early years, you could actually sell the NOLs. So the NOL was worth 35 cents on the dollar to a corporation who had a bunch of income. They could buy those NOLs from us to offset their income. So they'd pay us 20 cents or 25 cents, whatever it might be, on the dollar for every dollar of NOL that we sold them that they could offset to their income. So they didn't pay any taxes. So I thought it worked out well. And especially for us, because we did hit that home run and we did have an offset that allowed us to be able to generate the kind of dividend we did to the shareholder, non-taxable. And anytime you can give your shareholders a non-taxable dividend, it's a great thing. Well, I guess there's two ways of looking at that. One is from a personal standpoint. It was more than any college education could have ever gave me. I mean, I learned more from more people that were experienced, whether it was in law, whether it was in accounting, whether it was in management, all those areas. It was a great experience for me. I think ANCS overall, sort of a marginal experience for most people. I think because the expectations were so high in the beginning that there was no way that anybody could meet those expectations. So it really did generate a lot of dissident feelings throughout the state. And there were some things that was done wrong. In the early days, we didn't pay any attention to the tribal issues. Those really weren't on the table. And those were serious things to a lot of the subsistence users and the people living in Bush, Alaska. They always looked at things from a tribal view, but a corporation has a totally opposite view of things than tribal. I think it was a mistake that we didn't at least spend a lot more time trying to understand how these tribal issues worked into things. And now it's sort of created I'd say a divide between corporations and tribes. Corporations, of course, really sort of don't want the tribal issue, the tribes from the standpoint if they have tribal sovereignty power over ANCSA lands, if they get that, and ultimately that's what some of the fringe wants, that would give them taxation and police powers. That would really kill the corporation side. I'll give you an example. If ANWR ever went and Arctic Slopes lands on the slope which are 7I today, if the tribe had taxation power over those lands, very little revenue would come back in 7I because the tribe would tax it, I'm sure, at a heavy rate to keep all of that money within that tribe. And the corporation wouldn't do that well. I mean, those are issues that need to be looked at as you move forward in this. I think from the subsistence standpoint, from the tribal side, that's where we really screwed up. The tribe should have absolute rights and jurisdiction to do subsistence on all Indian land, corporation land or village lands, that they live, and shouldn't be controlled by the federal or state government. I mean, those should be tribal controlled issues for subsistence purposes. And I don't think we realized at the time the impacts that would have, especially on subsistence, being a corporation, having our lands and really not paying attention to it. And then being a corporation trying to change that rule to give subsistence rights under state law, we sort of ran into a stone wall. And I don't know if it's even possible, but corporations aren't set up in a way that really take care of the views of individuals. I mean, it's set up as a conglomerate to really focus on the bottom line. And to some shareholders, that's really not what it's all about. Other shareholders, I mean, especially in the case of Syria, you have all the major cultures in this melting pot, which is Syria, because they come from all over. And I can tell you, a Tlingit will never agree with an Athabascan on issues, or Eskimo with an Aleut. I mean, they just have different cultural values. And for Syria, it makes it very difficult because you're always walking on a tightrope. It's easier, I think, outside of Syria in other regions where you really have a single culture. People understand it better. And I think the subsistence issues are better understood in rural Alaska by the rural corporations. And I think they have a much better handle on it than somebody like Syria or Chugach, even Koniag, would have on those issues. Again, it's sort of hindsight. You look at things and you go, could we have done a better job of taking care of the shareholders and the shareholder needs on the subsistence side and their lifestyles when we were doing ANCSA? Yeah, we probably could have. But I think everybody was so focused on trying to get something while the pipeline was hot. And even during all of the amendments we did to ANCSA, I think that was sort of left behind, and sort of forgetting the culture of things and focused on money. That was probably one of the biggest downfalls because it did build expectations way too high from a dollar standpoint and left this whole cultural resource side out of the equation. And now that's coming back.